Hello everyone, my name is Ryder Rowan Phoenix, and I am transgender. I have transitioned from a feminine body to a masculine body, identifying as non-binary and using they/them pronouns. It's no secret that transgender people have been attacked for many years, but we have been targeted a lot in recent times. As trans identities are erased online, I find it crucial to make sure our voices are still heard and information still exists, especially for those seeking how to transition. I have therefore decided to put my story out there to provide as much information on transitioning as I can. I have gone through the transitioning process twice. I did the name and gender change process twice, top surgery twice, bottom surgery in two separate operations, and have even been on two versions of testosterone. I have gained a lot of knowledge from my experiences, which I want to share with you. Before I proceed, I will say I am not a doctor, and my beliefs are my own. I am not telling you to transition in a certain way. Everybody is different and will go through the process differently. Not everyone needs to go on hormones or have surgeries in order to be valid. You are authentically trans, no matter how much of the process you go through. However, based off my experience, I will recommend you get top surgery done before or soon after starting testosterone. This is because testosterone changes your body in a way that the surgeon might be unable to remove all of the breast tissue while you're on the hormone. If you ever get off testosterone, the tissue left behind will reform in a feminine way. It won't regrow because the tissue has already been suctioned away. But whatever is left behind will feminize instead of being more masculine. So this can lead you to needing top surgery again in the future. I will get into this more in later parts, but I wanted to mention it as much as I can because I wish I knew this before I started. Now, I structured all of this information to follow the timeline of my life, so information on physically transitioning will be located mostly after the beginning parts of my story, so feel free to jump around to whatever part you're interested in the most. Before we dive into my journey, I'll give you a little more background on me, especially as some of it does pertain to my transition. I was lucky to grow up in Southern California with a pretty supportive family. I enjoy writing, drawing, doing martial arts and Qigong, researching Taoist and neurodivergent topics, going on adventures in nature because I love trees and plants, playing games, cooking vegan food, playing the piano and singing on a very rare occasion, or otherwise listening to Freddie Mercury, reading and editing both text and videos. Now that you know a bit more about me, let's begin. How did I know I was transgender? Well, I knew from the very start, even without the language to say it. I always said I was a guy stuck in a girl's body, since I didn't even have the term transgender until after high school. I was born trans. It's really as simple as that. Just as I've always been a writer, always loved trees, and always wanted kids, I knew I've always been transgender. It's a part of my core identity, something I couldn't necessarily question or view as wrong because I know that's just who I am. And for many trans people, it's that simple. When I was a kid, I never wanted to have long hair, wear dresses or feminine clothing, or do makeup. I never wanted to learn how to cook or clean because that was what was expected of females, and I was not female. Many people probably saw me as just a tomboy, at least until I was able to present more masculine later on. Then I'd be mistaken as a boy quite often, which made me very happy. Anyhow, when I was a little kid, I was always the competitive one who enjoyed playing sports like basketball, loved PE class and running around, let snails slide all over my body, played with frog and truck toys, played video games, especially the shooter ones, and so on. I always fit the male stereotype by society's standards in regards to my hobbies and interests. However, it wasn't just society's pressures and gender roles that forced me into being trans. Like I said, I knew I was trans from the start. I could be living in the middle of nowhere and I would still be trans because it doesn't matter how society views you or expects you to be, especially when you have dysphoria. And I had strong dysphoria, despite being pretty lucky with being able to easily pass as a boy once I got my hair cut short and could dress more masculine. So even if I never had a concept of what male or female was, I would still feel very out of place in my body and need to transition. My body was not my own until I could transform. When I was in elementary school, two instances always come to mind in regard to being trans. The first instance was when my sister and I were playing make believe. In all of these games we'd play, I'd mostly act as the male characters, but a few times I would play as female, especially if I played on my own, since I'd have female characters too, though a majority of my characters are still male, since that's how I saw myself. Anyhow, my sister and I were acting like we were going to Hogwarts, since we had been big Harry Potter fans growing up. Yes, I know the author is a terrible person who I do not support, and I have pretty much moved past the series, though it's still a little difficult since it was a big childhood inspiration. All that aside, my sister and I were playing as our own characters who were sisters attending Hogwarts. We happened to get into a duel with Malfoy, since Malfoy was the bad guy. One of his spells hit me, and I was like, I'm a boy now! I remember my sister questioned this, and urged us to go to the hospital wing in order to change me back. But I said firmly, no, I'm a boy now. This was the only time my sister questioned my gender. Moving forward, despite neither of us ever talking about it again, I never officially came out about it, she just seemed to know and accept me. The second instance happened when I was in 5th grade. There was a news report on TV about a female person who transitioned to being male. That was when I realized that changing genders was possible. And I remember vividly saying to myself, that's going to be me one day. That was my goal, to go from female to male. I would magically do it. Of course, I didn't know what was actually involved or how to go about it, but I knew I would accomplish this. Now we're in the glorious middle school years. Ah, middle school. Don't we all just hate it? To be fair, middle school is already hard because you're going through puberty, then you add being trans on top of that, and now add being bullied by about 85% of the student body on top of that, and you end up with the anxious mess that was me. Yeah, middle school was terrible and sucked. I'm definitely not happy with how I acted back then, and who I am now is very different from who I was then, though I'm still very much trans now, as I'd been then. Part of me wishes that I'd come out as trans in middle school, and maybe things would have gone differently. Maybe I would have been able to be more comfortable in my body if I could present more masculine. But then again, maybe the bullying would have gotten worse. I wasn't bullied for being trans. I think people picked up on the fact that I'm autistic and bullied me for that, which caused me to shut down and go mute on people. I hardly spoke to anyone. I would speak to teachers since I always looked up to them and saw them as friends, but when it came to students, I only spoke to a handful of the girls because the girls were nicer to me. I never spoke to any boys since they tended to bully me more than the girls. Now, as I was only hanging out with girls and didn't speak to the boys, this caused me to have the only instance of doubt on whether I was trans. I hated that I had no male friends despite being male. But none of the guys wanted to hang out with me, and nobody ever chose me for their teams in PE, despite me being good at sports and playing as aggressively as the boys. I therefore had a moment of doubt if I was actually meant to be a boy. I don't want to get religious here, since I am a spiritual person who follows Taoist philosophy, not the religion. But back in the day, as a little kid who didn't know any better, I merely believed there's a benevolent God that lived in the sky. I didn't know anything beyond that, as I never went to church, thankfully. Anyhow, I decided that God would tell me if I was meant to be trans. I therefore asked God for 3 signs within 1 week if I was meant to be a boy. I had to put a time frame on my request in order to know if I got these 3 signs or not, after all. And funnily enough, I got all 3. The first sign was the transgender person being on the news again. The second sign was my mom specifically talking about this transgender person on a different day out of nowhere, and my mom had never suspected that I was trans, assuming I was in the tomboy phase, and despite that phase being my entire life. The third sign was my friend calling me Sam instead of my dead name, also out of nowhere since they never called me that before, and I don't think they call me that again in the future. Once I had my 3 signs from God that I was meant to be trans, I never doubted myself again. Anyhow, it wouldn't have mattered in the long run if God told me I was trans or not, as I would still be trans regardless due to my dysphoria. Again, being trans is a core part of who I am, just as I have a passion for writing and can't live without doing it. It was definitely challenging to make it through middle school, between the bullies and puberty and daily panic attacks. Yes, I had daily panic attacks, and that made me miss a lot of school. I thought my stomach was hurting, or I was having mini heart attacks. I had no idea I was suffering from crippling anxiety, and it was all thanks to the bullies. Now, there's one instance with the bullies that I must mention. It made me very, very angry and ashamed, and I still feel upset by it. No matter how humiliating the story is, it's a crucial point to bring up. I attended the after-school Boys and Girls Club program, like most of my bullies. During classes, during the day, the bullies hardly ever came after me because there were teachers around. However, when we were all outside in the after-school program with only a few young adults barely keeping an eye on us, the bullies would come after me. They would literally chase me and yell insults. I pursued them too because I wasn't one to sit by and be bullied. Yet I also never got into actual fistfights since I didn't want to get in trouble. Chasing one another around seemed to be the compromise. Anyhow, on this particular day, they had initiated the usual pursuit. I was really worn out after running for almost a whole hour, my chest aching for air. Remember that I'm only one person. They have multiple people who can just chase me at random points whenever they want, so I was exhausted way quicker than any of them. I collapsed to the ground, struggling to breathe, my anxiety starting to take over. All of the bullies surrounded me in a circle, making fun of me as I lay helpless on the grass and unable to react. One of the girls announced to everyone that there was blood on my pants, and I had started the period. This was very humiliating for many reasons, but especially with being trans. I checked when I got home, and there was no blood. I hadn't started anything, just a period of rage. Thankfully, this did not happen again, and I was able to go to my home or a friend's home after school when starting 8th grade. Middle school wasn't entirely horrible, at least. In PE, we had to have our hair cut short if we didn't want to tie it up, and since I refused to tie mine up, I was finally able to get my hair cut short, at least to my chin. It wasn't as short or boyish as I wanted, but it was a start. I also got to wear more baggy sports clothes instead of the feminine stick-to-your-body clothes. This was more thanks to my autism and sensory issues with clothes. Like, I still can't touch jeans to this day. Ugh. Whenever going to the beach, I was allowed to wear a giant shirt over my bathing suit so I could hide my body. Now, that's a whole other topic to get into. Sexualization. It is very repulsive to me how females are always sexualized no matter the society or culture. While I can go off on this, I will just say that, in regard to my own transition, this is another big reason I did not want to be seen as female. And I never wanted anyone to see my body in this way or sexualize me, female or not. The heavy sexualization of females in media also makes me wonder if that's why I'd never connect to female characters growing up. I would relate to the tomboys for a bit, but then they'd be sexualized or become a generic female stereotype, and I'd instantly become disgusted with them. It's the same thing when a character suddenly got a love interest, I'd lose the connection to them. I always just connected to the single male characters. Let's go on a little side rant here. My anxiety is the type where I can't eat anything if I feel too anxious. I'll feel like I'll have to throw up despite this never happening before. This was why I would go home early from school, or even feel the need to flee from restaurants when we would go out to eat as a family. There were times where I'd be panicking so hardcore that I'd have to force feed myself tiny bits of bread because I'd be so anxious that I'd end up in a hospital for not eating. Now, I was clearly underweight, thin, and small. I couldn't eat due to anxiety from both the bullies and food, but I also just wouldn't eat from the fear of getting a large chest if I ate too much. This was one of my greatest fears growing up. And not just for dysphoric reasons, though that was pretty fair too, but also because I did not want to be sexualized, like all of those female characters. I therefore refused to eat at times, even when I wasn't anxious, in order to keep my weight low. To this day, I still don't know what I would have done if I had a larger chest. I was very lucky to be small-chested that I could pass without a binder. I really wish I had support from the local LGBT community while navigating middle school. I do feel things could have been better for me if I'd had that early exposure, but I didn't even know what LGBTQ plus meant until I was out of high school, and so I struggled silently. In high school, I got away from the bullies that had been present in middle school, since most of them went to a different high school. My anxiety went down, though I still suffered from panic attacks, and I was able to socialize a bit more, rather than be mute. I even made acquaintances with guys, though I wouldn't say any of them ever became friends. But it was nice to have actual interactions with them. In 11th grade, I even took a video production class, and the all-male team had actually chosen me. This made me very happy to not only be chosen for the first time ever, but also because I felt seen as a guy, especially since I did pass as a boy then. I was able to get my hair cut shorter as I made my way through high school, getting it cut as short as a boy's by 11th grade. I also got to wear more sports clothes than in middle school. I refused to shave, despite my mom yelling at me for not doing so. The only thing that really gave me away, especially online, was that my voice was super light. But apart from that, everyone really started to see me as male. Teachers and students alike called me Sam without even asking, and most people didn't use pronouns for me if they could avoid it. I never said anything about my name or pronouns to confirm my transness, because in my eyes, it was so obvious I was male by then, and everyone seemed to detect it. Of course, I was still into the more masculine things, like shooting games, acting as male characters, taking PE for all years of high school, despite it only being required for 2. Speaking of PE, however, there was an instance in 10th grade that I have to mention. My hair wasn't as short then, and I wasn't actively passing as male just yet. We were playing frisbee, and my team consisted of 3 other guys and 2 or 3 girls who didn't really want to play. The 3 guys actively excluded the girls, and they treated me as such, despite me trying hard and wanting them to pass me the frisbee. I still wish I had stuck up for myself back then and called these guys out on being sexist. But at least I did get to throw a ball at one of the guys later on, so I got my revenge. No matter how much I love PE and would have enjoyed playing sports, I never did join any official teams. I refused to be a part of the girls' team and wear those horrible clothes that just expose your body. I do sometimes regret not joining a team or doing like track and field, but it was definitely for the better with my terrible dysphoria. Anyhow, let's change gears to sexuality, since high school is when everyone seems to have a boyfriend or girlfriend. In high school, the pressure is on. You have books, movies, shows, all displaying teens with partners. You must have a partner. Now, I did have a friend who I was kind of trying to get to be my partner. This friend is a girl, since my friends were all girls, as stated before. Now, we hung out a lot in middle school, acting as characters in the stories that we would create, where I would, of course, be the male characters, and she would be the female characters. The main characters that we'd play as would typically be self-inserts, and sometimes our characters would act like lovers. This gave me the impression that she liked me, and maybe I liked her. In high school, she started to drift away to a different group of friends. I didn't like these people because they were pretty sexual and sexist. Even though my friend and I still hung out, creating stories where our characters would get together, we had more downs than ups. One day, I did eventually ask her out, and I realize now that this was because I didn't want to lose her as a friend. Not to mention there's the pressure of society saying you need a partner. I didn't actually like her in that way. Either way, she did not take it well. She told me she wasn't a lesbian, and I told her I wasn't either. I told her I'm a boy. I went on to say that I would be a boy, physically, one day. I asked if she would date me once I changed later on, and she said we have to wait and see. While we did remain friends after that, things were strained for a bit. Then 12th grade came, and with its prom. My friend really wanted to go with a guy, and I offered to go with her since nobody was asking her out. After a while, I was able to persuade her to go with me, though she didn't seem that happy about it because I wasn't a real boy. Regardless, I convinced my mom to let me wear a suit, the only other reason I wanted to go to prom. Needless to say, prom did not go good. My friend left me. My anxiety spiked so high I thought I'd have a heart attack and drop dead, and my autistic self got very overstimulated by the loud music and crowds. I ended up in the teacher's lounge, my friend angry at me for leaving her despite it being the other way around. We had another down in our friendship, but eventually got better again. We had too many ups and downs that I'm so glad we never actually got together. And at this point in time, we're just such different people with different values that we still just would not have been a good fit. Now, during high school, I thought I had to be into girls since I was a guy. And that's what society expects. I definitely wasn't into the LGBT community, and while I knew gay people existed, the idea of gay people made me uneasy. I'm sad to say I saw the LGBTQ plus community as weird. I saw myself as some sort of exception who just didn't belong in this community. Anyhow, I couldn't see myself as a gay guy. I also feared that if I was into guys, people would tell me that I'm still a girl if I was into guys. So I had to be a guy who was into girls. Fast forward a little bit, and I realized I was actually not attracted to people. In case it wasn't already obvious, I'm sex repulsed. I eventually heard the term asexual and took that on for myself at some point, either a little past high school or at the very end of high school, and asexual meaning little to no sexual attraction. Now, my views would change slightly in the future in terms of romantic attraction, but I will still say I'm on the asexual spectrum to this day. I never officially came out, at least in my eyes. After all, it was so obvious to me, and everyone around me, or so I thought, that I was a boy. And that's all there was to it. During high school, I did begin publishing books. I chose a pen name when publishing my first book in 2014, during 11th grade. When the book came in the mail, I held it up for my family to see while covering the name. I wanted my family to guess. They thought it would be Sam. Eventually, my mom guessed it was Sean, realizing why I had asked her a few weeks before what my name would have been if I was born male. My mom was mad. My dad seemed indifferent, and my sister could have easily guessed what was going on. No, my mom believed I was in a tomboy phase. A phase that just so happened to be my entire life. In fact, she stated she wished I was a lesbian instead of trans, I believe during the second time I came out. My dad seemed to always want a son, since we'd play shooting games and sports together, especially when I was on the younger side. The second time I came out was in 2015, after I graduated high school. I made it very clear, pretty much saying, I'm going to be a boy one day. This is what I'm doing. You're not going to stop me. Once I'm 18, I'm going to be a boy. But then the question became, how do I magically turn into a boy? Thankfully, my sister knew someone who is transgender, and I got in contact with him. He walked me through the whole process, and I still very much appreciate his help. He told me to start off by seeing a psychologist who would confirm I'm dysphoric and not transitioning for the wrong reasons, that I was of sound mind and knew what I was getting into. I would then be able to get referred to an endocrinologist for hormone therapy, and later get top surgery and bottom surgery if I wanted to. This is the part of the story where I advise you to actually start with top surgery if you can, or get top surgery done soon after starting hormones, not waiting like a whole year or more. As stated before, if you're on hormones for a whole year before surgery, your body will become masculine. Your breast tissue will stretch to shape itself as more masculine. This means it will be harder for the surgeon to remove all of the tissue when you get surgery done, which could be fine if you don't ever plan to get off hormones in the future. But if you do get off hormones, or think you'll lose access to hormones, whatever tissue was left behind is going to reform. It does not regrow, as it can't regrow once it's gone. It will revert to a feminine shape, which means you'll need to get another surgery if you're still dysphoric and want to pursue this. This is exactly what happened to me, and I wish I knew this sooner. Something else I wish I knew about sooner were binders. What are binders? Chest binders. They compress your chest and make you appear flatter. I found out about these when talking to my sister's acquaintance about transitioning, and I only started wearing them once I was out of high school. Now, I didn't necessarily need a binder, as I passed well enough with a flatter chest. The sports bras I was forced to wear worked okay enough, and sometimes I wouldn't even wear them. But I still greatly appreciated and preferred having the binders once I got them. In a way, getting the binders was the start of my transition, as I was now out to my family and requesting that people use he/him pronouns for me. We looked into getting me a psychologist shortly after my first binder arrived in the summer of 2015. There are a lot of rules with binders, and you need to be careful with them. I actually got a size larger than what I needed, due to being too broad-shouldered to get the smaller size over my head. Though it was a size up, it still worked well, and I was actually able to break all of these rules, which I don't recommend. Chest binders, just like corsets, can be really tight and break your ribs. Not that I've ever worn a corset, but this is just based off of what I heard, especially from my sister. So what are these rules? In general, you don't want to wear them for more than 8 hours, so that way your body can get a break. You don't wear them while exercising or swimming, or otherwise your lungs will have a harder time getting air in because they're being compressed. And you don't want to wear them to bed because, again, this can cause breathing issues, especially if you're asleep for more than 8 hours. I broke all of these rules, and I was completely fine, but I had a larger size, so I had more breathing space, and it wasn't tight on me. If you feel a need to wear a binder long term or during exercise, I honestly recommend you find a way around these rules by just getting a bigger size that you are able to comfortably move around in. You might have also heard of using tape instead of binders. I haven't tried this out myself, but I know a lot of people don't recommend it. They say that it can actually have a lot of negative consequences, especially when it comes to top surgery. It seems to mess up the results since the surgeon can't remove as much tissue if it's been moved around by the tape. So please use binders instead of tape if you're looking to have a flat chest pre-surgery. If you don't know how to obtain a binder, your local LGBTQ+ community might have some in stock. but they do tend to go fast. You can otherwise get them online, and a lot of these companies usually have an option to conceal what's being sent to you if you don't want your family to find out. I got into college, and it was around this time that I looked into getting a psychologist, though I'll get to that in the next part. Now, I went into this new school looking male and presenting as male, especially now that I had a binder and more masculine clothes. In fact, December of 2015, I asked for male clothes during the holidays and got rid of all my female clothes. Such a nice little purge. Now, the only thing that gave me away was my stupid light voice and my dead name on every single thing. I absolutely hated my dead name, being called out, and having to respond to it. I tried to reply in a deep and firm voice saying Sam, with such a death glare to make it clear that I was not to go by the dead name. Most of the teachers listened, but it was still very embarrassing to have them display this name on the projector or online tasks. College was definitely one of the more humiliating times in my life, literally just for this dead name nonsense. I did not manage to make any friends in college, and I believe being trans was a big reason for it. People would see a guy with a girl's name and be confused. Was I female to male, just starting my transition, or was I male to female, having not started just yet? Either way, people tended to ignore me in classes. I'd never be part of groups during projects, despite wanting to. Of course, my autism and anxiety also acted up, resulting in breakdowns and mute spells, as if I was in middle school all over again, after thinking I had moved past this. I just wanted to belong, and no matter where I went, I just couldn't fit in. I even changed my major as many times as I was allowed, and while I did do it for genuine reasons based on what I was interested in, or not interested in, I had hoped that it would bring along new faces to be potential friends. It didn't. And after 2 years, I dropped out because I just couldn't find a major I enjoyed, apart from theater, but that schedule clashed with my martial arts schedule later on, and thus I didn't continue it. I just felt like I didn't belong in any of the classes, and I was humiliated with being outed as trans when all I wanted to do was have a new start in stealth mode. In the end of 2015, during my first semester of college, I saw a psychologist. The rule was that I had to see him 3 times before I could get a referral to an endocrinologist to start hormones. I only saw him once more after that. I'm honestly not sure if you still need a psychologist diagnosis before you can begin hormones. It probably varies based on where you live. A psychologist needs to confirm you're actually feeling dysphoric before signing you a referral for hormones, that you know what you're getting into, and that you're of sound mind to make your own decisions. Seeing the psychologist was just my way of confirming that I was trans over and over in order to receive the referral. It was a stepping stone. You could of course see the psychologist for other reasons, and I do recommend that you do if you're mentally struggling with something. Back then though, I just wanted to get on hormones as fast as possible. For each session I had, I brought in a different family member to basically confirm that I was always a guy. I recommend doing this to validate your identity fast, especially if you're trying to get on hormones quickly. The first session, my sister went in, backing me up as always being male and knowing about it since playing that game in elementary school. The second session was with my dad, who verified me as his son growing up. My mom went in for the third session, saying that she thought I was just in the tomboy phase my whole life. The psychologist broke things down for her, explaining what it was like to be trans, since I struggled to put it into words back then. This is another great reason to bring in your family members, so that way the psychologist can educate them properly, instead of you having to do all the work. Everyone began using he/him pronouns for me, and calling me Sam. It was the most difficult for my mom, who was pretty against me being trans in the beginning. After seeing the psychologist 3 times, I got the referral to the endocrinologist and pretty much moved on. I do regret this, as I later found out he had passed away, and I wished I had thanked him properly for getting my gender journey started, and also recommending that I take martial arts classes. He truly changed my life for the better. So he told me that as a transgender person and a short man, I should learn to defend myself. Doing martial arts has hugely changed my life for the better, allowing me to grow so much as a person, overcome my anxiety by learning to be confident, learn how to cope with my autism as I communicated better and learned to socialize, and keep me healthy in body and mind. It gave me a sense of belonging in an open minded and supportive community, which was what I had been actively looking for since I was a little kid who just never belonged. My martial arts school is where I belong, and it's all thanks to being trans that I came to find this home. I highly recommend you do martial arts if you're queer or trans. Learning defense, especially nowadays, is crucial. You never know when you might be attacked for your identity, whether you're showcasing it or closeted. There are many types of martial arts too, so just try it out. It doesn't have to become your life purpose, just pick it up as a fun hobby. Exercising is fantastic for mental health as well as physical, and I really can't recommend exercising enough after facing health issues when I had stopped exercising for a bit. More on that later. What is testosterone? It's the more masculine hormone, allowing a person to have more masculine characteristics. Estrogen is the feminine hormone. Everyone should have a bit of each hormone, otherwise you can face health issues. Of course, we have more hormones in our bodies than just those two, and intersex people have a different combination of all these hormones, making them like a mix between male and female, or neither male or female. There are about 40 variations of intersex, and not every intersex person even knows they're intersex. Every body is different. Anyhow, I got to see the endocrinologist in the start of 2016, which is the year I started martial arts. And this is important to note. I officially began the shot February 4th, 2016, and in the months that followed, I got to feel the changes. I went with the shot because it would be the most effective, since it injects right into your body, as opposed to topicals that go on top of your skin and less is absorbed. The shot would also be effective in a quicker amount of time, and I would need to take it less often. I personally had the shot done every other week, alternating which side of my body got the shot each time. I couldn't administer the shot myself, as I've never been comfortable with anatomy, or doctors, or needles, and the needles were pretty big. I had my mom give it to me, since she is thankfully a nurse and knows how to administer it already. My blood work would have to be checked pretty consistently, not just to ensure my testosterone levels were good, but also to check my liver health, which was always fine. Now, when it came to doing the blood work, I would need to do the shot week 1, do the blood work literally 1 week after, an exact week later, during week 2, and then I would see the endocrinologist again week 3. We'd check my levels every 3 months, which was how often I would have to see the endocrinologist in the beginning. After my levels stabilized and we knew how much testosterone I needed, I was able to see the doctor every 6 months instead, but it is pretty costly in the beginning. Now, what sort of effects does T, or testosterone, have on the body? The voice drops after a few months, your body will get hairier. Mine was already hairy thanks to my Italian heritage, so I didn't really see much change here. You get facial hair, and for me, it's still a bit more on the patchy side rather than full. You stop getting your monthly cycles, which this happened after only 1 month of being on the T shot, for me, personally. Your body redistributes fat and becomes more muscular. Your face shape changes. You get really oily, but this only lasts a few weeks, maybe a few months at most. And your sense of smell will actually be less intense, which was a relief for me since I would get sensory overload by strong scents. Now, when I was on the testosterone shot, it was $150 per bottle. This is like a little bottle. The insurance just didn't cover it. Testosterone gel, which I'll cover in a later part, costs about $400 per prescription, though you can use GoodRx to get it cheaper. And it was typically not covered by insurance. It's kind of hit or miss. Once I began T, I sought a name change. As you recall, I went into my first year of college with a dead name, and it was very humiliating. I therefore sought to change my name as quickly as I could, especially after my body became more masculine. The first time I did my name change, the process had been different than what it is now in Southern California. I had to go to the court with the paperwork, wait 6 weeks, then go in front of a judge. Today's process is merely waiting the 6 weeks for approval with no need to go before a judge. Again, I'm sure this is dependent on where you live. I got my first name change done for free because I didn't have a job at the time, since I didn't want to get a job with my dead name, and thus I couldn't afford it. For the second name change, I did pay the full $435 since I had a job and enough money saved up. Since I wanted to get the name change done fast, I didn't really stop to think about what name I actually wanted. I went with Sam because everyone was already calling me that. And I didn't want to be annoying asking to be called a new name, and I had already been very strict with people using he/him pronouns. For my middle name, I chose Scott. I just like how it sounds, and it's the name of one of my favorite PE teachers. Once you change your name, it's best to put together a list of everything you'd need to change. State-issued ID or driver's license, social security, birth certificate, passport, bank information, credit and debit cards, health insurance, medical paperwork, dental insurance, school paperwork, which includes your graduation diploma from high school, job paperwork, and so on. It's honestly an easy process to change everything once you get your license and social security changed. It just takes a long time. After my name change in 2016, I was set on my gender journey for the time being. The endocrinologist had told me that I wasn't allowed to get surgery until I had lived as a man for a whole year. She apparently thought I meant bottom surgery, not top surgery. So I could have had it sooner, and I wish I had. Anyhow, I thought I had to wait the whole year of being on testosterone, so I waited, and then once it came time, I found Dr. Mofid of La Jolla, and I got top surgery done June 5th of 2017. According to the notes, I had a periareolar technique. I totally killed that, which combined direct excision with liposuction. Liposuction? I don't know all the medical terms. As stated before, I was pretty flat-chested to begin with. Doing vigorous martial arts for a whole year while on testosterone also made the breast tissue stretch out to appear more masculine. Dr. Mofid had been unable to remove all of the tissue, as I later found out, but at that time, since I was still on T and doing lots of martial arts, I appeared to have a completely flat chest after the surgery. So how does the whole process work? Once you find a top surgeon and go in for a consultation, they'll go over the risks and take pictures of you to figure out what kind of surgery they want to do. They'll go over insurance coverage and costs. Being in California, insurance was required by law to cover some of the costs, since it's gender-affirming care. So this first top surgery was $3,000 out of pocket, despite the total being about $7,000. And I believe it went up a little bit in price when I had got it done the second time, so I paid $4,000 out of pocket, and it was about $8,000 to $9,000 total. Leading up to the surgery, you do not want to get sunburned, or they will cancel it. The day before the surgery, you have to take a shower with a special cleaning solution, which they will provide, or tell you where to buy. You have to wear clean pajamas and sleep in a fresh set of sheets and blankets. The next morning before you arrive to the surgery, you need to take another shower with the rest of the special cleaning solution. Dress in a button-up shirt, like this one, which I actually got because of doing top surgery, and you'll want to have plenty of button-up shirts for after surgery. Of course, you also don't want to eat or drink anything leading up to the surgery, and you want to make sure you have a caretaker to drive you home, and of course, take care of you at least during the first few days, because you'll need that. I had my surgery done in the morning. I got changed into the dressing gown, they marked my chest, then I got taken to the back room. I was given anesthesia, and I was out. When I woke up, I was free from my chest dysphoria, at least for the time being. I was given 2 drains, which were attached to my stitches and caused me lots of pain if I moved an inch. I had to hold both drains as I walked around, and my family members had to literally grab everything from me. The drains weren't attached for too long at least, since I had surgery on Monday and they were removed on Thursday. Removing them was the most excruciating physical pain I had felt up until that point. But once they were out, I was able to move way more freely, and I was no longer in that much pain. Of course, you don't want to move your arms above your head or lift anything heavy. And like I said before, you want to wear a bunch of button-ups since it's easier to get your arms through the sleeves. Now, I was out of work for 2 weeks, and I was on light duty for the following 2 weeks. I was unable to lift anything heavy or move my arms above my head, as already stated. I had to be out of martial arts and exercise for an entire month, and you're not supposed to swim for 4 to 6 weeks. Now, when you take a shower after you're permitted to, which is usually 24 hours after surgery, I think I personally waited a few days for the drains to be out to take a shower. You have to face away from the water, so that way it's not just beating on your chest, and you'll have to have somebody else wash your hair for you. So I'm going to put some pictures on display of my top surgery results. These pictures are 2 years after having surgery, since I didn't have any pictures when I first went through because I was in stealth mode and didn't want anybody knowing I was trans. So the surgery didn't leave any major scarring at all. I had barely anything, just a few little scars on the side where the drains had been attached, and then a few in the front. And honestly, by now they're so faded that people don't even believe I even had surgery. In fact, each surgery I've done only gave me tiny incision marks. So here are the pictures. Once I was finally comfortable in my own skin after top surgery, I got more involved with the online LGBTQ community. I learned about different identities and began accepting myself as an LGBT individual, rather than an exception. I also realized I no longer wanted to go stealth mode, trying to hide the fact that I'm trans. I felt I was being dishonest with people, which definitely did not help my anxiety, especially since I worried about being discovered. I therefore decided to come out online in 2017 to see how it would go. After all, I could always delete my accounts and start over elsewhere if things were to go badly. But I had no need to worry as it went well. I therefore decided to come out to real-life people in 2018. I started with a few instructors at my martial arts school. I told my personal instructor first. He was excited he was the first person I told, and he was definitely okay with it. I then came out to one of my other favorite instructors, and he was pretty chill about it. I had a meeting with Sifu, who is the head instructor, and he realized why I wanted to change instructors when I first began. So to backtrack a little, I was given a female instructor as my personal instructor when I started off. I wasn't trying to be sexist and didn't fully realize that I was until later, but I didn't want a female instructor, especially right at the start of my transition. After all, my friends were all female growing up. I had spent a lot of time with my sister and my mom growing up. I really lacked and needed a male role model, as I sought to be more masculine myself. I therefore asked for a new instructor, and they thankfully accommodated me without asking too many questions. I am ashamed with my sexist views back then, and am very happy to report I've done a complete 180. Anyhow, this female instructor became one of my favorite instructors too, and I came out to her next in order to explain the situation and apologize. She completely understood and accepted me, and it turned out her child is trans too, so she really did actually understand my need for a male role model. Now, these 4 instructors were the only ones I came out to as female to male transgender, and they all happily accepted me. Fast forward a few months of being more active in the LGBTQ community, and I learned more about other genders. So growing up, it was always male or female. You weren't allowed to be anything else or know anything else existed. I knew I was definitely not female, but being male didn't feel quite right either. I especially did not like having guys coming up to me talking about being into girls or getting drunk or whatever. All of that made me very uncomfortable. Of course, there were also the male stereotypes that I now had to deal with of cars and being handy with tools, and so on and so forth. I was now pressured by society in a different way. Instead of taking on female roles of cooking and cleaning, I was expected to be good with my hands and into drinking or cars. Male just wasn't fitting me either. Since I was having my mind open to more possibilities, realizing other genders exist in multiple societies and cultures across the globe, especially pre-colonial, I decided one day I wouldn't be either male or female. I continued to analyze gender roles and realized just how stupid they are. Why should females be the ones to cook and clean when those are life skills that everyone should have regardless of gender? Why should males be so controlling and masculine in order to be male, and then we have all this toxic masculinity? Gender roles are just a social construct. They are in place to control people. Side rant, I despise gender reveals and how gender is forced onto an individual the moment their sex is discovered, before they're even born. It's so messed up. So screw gender roles, screw the patriarchy and racist societies. Anyhow, I was talking to my boss, who is a Christian, but he uses his religion to actually love other people like you're supposed to do, instead of using it to hate on everyone. So he's a real Christian in my eyes. Anyhow, we were talking about gender. He had the Christian point of view of, you shouldn't have to change your body since you were born this way. You can still be female and be into masculine things like a tomboy. He brought up his wife being into math and finance, which is typically more masculine. He basically said you can have whatever interest you want and still be female. I took his words in, but I took them in a way that he wasn't expecting. I was like, you know what? You're right. I can have whatever interest I want. Gender does not matter at all. So I'm going to be agender. Agender meaning without a gender. I took on this label for a little bit, but it never felt right either. I still felt I had a gender, so I just used non-binary as like an umbrella term, meaning I could be a mix of male and female, neither male or female, or some other identity altogether. Kind of a figure it out later sort of thing. After choosing to be non-binary to escape society's pressuring gender roles and be authentically myself, I found that I was no longer wanting to hide this part of me. I finally found pride in being an LGBTQ plus individual. And I knew I'd have to come out again. After all, I wanted people to refer to me with they, them pronouns, so they would have to be informed of this. In June of 2018, I came out as non-binary. At work, I wrote a note and put it up for everyone to see. Nobody really cared or made a big deal about it. Only 1 or 2 coworkers used my pronouns in the beginning, but all these years later, I'm happy to say it's finally caught on, even though it's like a completely different crew from back then. I came out online too, this time utilizing platforms that my real-life people followed me on. Plenty of my martial arts folks liked my post or commented messages of support. The instance that really stands out to me, and that I love thinking back on, is with one of my favorite instructors. So I went to class the next day. That favorite instructor, who was not one of the ones I had come out to before, had been speaking to a different instructor, and I was standing right there within earshot, and he was talking about me. And he used my they, them pronouns. He's officially the first person to use my they, them pronouns in real life. So I thanked him a little bit after that for using my pronouns and showing support. We got into this huge conversation on gender roles, and colonization ruining gender, and many other aspects, of course, in multiple cultures and societies. It was one of the best conversations I ever had, analyzing gender with someone else who does identify as queer, using he, they pronouns. He was the first queer person I met in real life, like who I actually got to know, because there was that one acquaintance of my sister's who was trans, but I didn't really get to know him too well. Yet here is this amazing instructor who I still very much look up to this day, who just happens to be queer too. He really taught me to accept myself, changing my perspective and enlightening me to research more about cultures pre-colonization. So thank you very much, you know who you are. So it was around this time period that I also came across She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. So this show was actually a big inspiration for my current story, as it made me realize I could make a fully LGBTQ plus cast in an LGBT accepting world. So shout out to She-Ra for its positive depiction of LGBTQ plus characters, which also helped me in accepting myself. I also began picking up more feminine interest, such as cooking and singing. In the past, I avoided cooking due to the gender label attached, but also because I found meat and eggs to be disgusting, and I did not want to touch those. So I went vegetarian in 2016 and vegan in 2018, and after that, cooking became way more tolerable and even fun. And of course, as mentioned before, it's important for everyone to learn cooking, no matter their gender. As for singing, I realized it's a form of art that anyone can partake in, as it's a way to set the soul free. And with a deeper voice, I did feel more confident in singing, at least in private. I learned to have any hobby or interest I want, present myself however I choose, and ultimately just be whoever I want to be. Writing, as mentioned earlier, is a very big thing in my life and a core part of my identity. I've been writing ever since I could hold a pencil and creating stories before then. Now, including LGBTQ plus characters in my writing didn't really come about until later on. I didn't really accept the LGBTQ plus community, because while I wasn't hateful towards these people, I still found them to be odd, and growing up uneducated about them made me just feel uneasy around them. So apart from making myself magically transition in the one story my sister and I played during elementary school, I lacked LGBTQ plus characters until one of my stories in high school. Even when I added representation in, it wasn't the best. It's embarrassing, and I'm still ashamed about the first character I had made. My friend and I created a gay character for the fun of it, and while he's still one of my favorite characters in that series, we often made fun of him, especially when he was with his lover. His lover ended up dying, but not him, I don't think. Either way, it wasn't good representation. The next story I wrote had very mixed views on LGBTQ plus rep. There were two main characters, one homophobic and the other gay, with his partner being one of the other important characters. This definitely made my audience feel uncertain, as they enjoyed the first main character until learning that she was homophobic. There was also mention in there of a story with a trans person in it, which the gay main character was supportive of the trans character in this little story, but the homophobic person was not. Funnily enough, the homophobic character was based off my friend who thought I was a lesbian and didn't want to date me, while both gay characters I had made were based off my own characteristics. While I didn't connect the dots just yet, the story was definitely a testing the waters kind of thing to see how my audience would react to having LGBT representation in the first place. In my next series, LGBTQ plus characters showed up later on. I had been trying to keep romance and relationships out of the series when I began it, but it inevitably snuck in by the end, especially as my viewpoints shifted. So leading all up to this, I was definitely going stealth mode. It was during this series that I started coming out. Now, I did unfortunately use the representation in the series as a plot point, particularly with the main character being revealed as intersex and transgender. I suppose the representation was okay overall, but the series was dark fantasy and focused on fighting for human rights. This saw multiple races standing up for equality, but also LGBTQ plus characters, with the focus shifting to the queer characters more, as I realized that I shouldn't be the one writing a story about race. I did do my best to handle these subjects after the story had been started, but it would definitely have been something I would change if I ever were to rewrite that story for some reason. Anyhow, the story reflects my coming outness, acceptance, and fighting for the right to exist. While several LGBTQ plus characters did die, because a lot of characters died, I kept quite a few alive, which includes a lesbian couple and several non-binary people. While the rep wasn't the best, by the end of the story I did learn to accept myself and fight for others, and I also knew exactly what story I wanted to write next. When starting my next story, I wanted to write a fully LGBTQ plus cast during happier times without a focus on wars like all my previous stories. I wanted some lighthearted fun taking place in an accepting world where being queer is the norm and multiple races coexist, focused entirely on these colorful characters. I didn't want to write another coming out story full of struggle to just find acceptance by others. I wanted to just write something genuine. Thus, Rainbow Reflections was born. 3 sexes are recognized throughout most of the world, with it being male, female, and intersex, as it should be. There are usually 4 or 5 recognized genders of male, female, non-binary, gender fluid, or agender. And of course, transgender people are pretty much accepted. A lot of kids grow up with they-them pronouns until they know and choose their own gender. Most people are bi or pansexual, and plenty of asexual people exist. People can wear whatever clothing they want, and have any style they want, and their fashion expression does not reflect their gender. In terms of our main 4, who I will have depicted on screen here, from left to right, we've got Hyaktu, who is gay, gray-sexual, and on the gender-fluid side, though we see this more later on. Zin, who is the transgender and non-binary person, who is also asexual and aromantic, a nice little self-insert kind of reflection of myself. Ren, who is pan-romantic and demisexual, kind of gray-sexual. And Sorella, who is a lesbian. When starting this series in 2020, I had come to accept myself even more. My characters have taught me a lot about gender, sexuality, and gender expression. I realized guys can be into feminine things, wearing makeup or dresses, without being gay or even bi. Girls can be super masculine, without being lesbian or bi. I got more comfortable with my own body. For example, I no longer care if my hair is short, and I actually prefer it being a little on the longer side. Like, not too long where I can't manage it, but definitely not super short like I had been wearing it before. I don't mind wearing shorts that go above my knees now, or low-cut tank tops. I simply don't feel a need to pass as male or non-binary. After all, there's no set definition of what non-binary should look like, and the whole point of being non-binary is so you can have any expression without feeling the pressure of looking male or female. Now, my characters taught me to accept myself, realize identities can change, and stop labeling and confining myself to a box. I can be free to experiment, and this has become more apparent over the years. I could have really used a series like Rainbow Reflections when I grew up. Seeing that being trans and asexual is completely normal, other genders exist, and that people can love whoever they want. I would have likely accepted myself a lot sooner, and I sincerely hope that Rainbow Reflections can be a guiding light to others. 2018 was the year of acceptance for me, and when I had come out as non-binary. In 2019, it became legal to be non-binary in California. I therefore decided to change my gender to non-binary, and I might as well change my name if I had to go through the whole legal process all over again. The name and gender change was a little different this time from the first time. I filled out similar paperwork, but this time I didn't have to stand before a judge. I just had to wait the 6 weeks before going back to the court to pick up all the paperwork. Now, a little side note, if they try to make you publish your name change in a newspaper, you can opt out by pointing out that you're also changing your gender. They don't seem to force you to publish your name and gender change in a newspaper, probably because of privacy and safety reasons. Anyhow, I wanted to choose a new name. When I had done my first name change, I went with the quickest thing that I could to just get it over with and not have a humiliating dead name anymore. I didn't really give it much thought. I never cared for Sam, especially with it still being a tie to the Deadname. Though I liked the name Scott, it never really fit me and I couldn't really make myself go by that either. And since I was going non-binary, I really wanted to have a unisex name. So choosing a name was actually pretty difficult, especially because I was also trying to find a name by May in order to have a new name by the time my birthday came around in July. I was turning 22 on the 22nd, and it felt fitting to have a new true-to-me identity by that point. I first attempted to make up my own name because I couldn't find anything I liked. I wanted to go by Xenovis, But my mom hated the name. I still wish I went by it anyway, but it's fine. I used it for Zin and Rainbow Reflections instead. I also looked into Ren, but it didn't fit me, so I used that name for my other main character. I eventually settled on the names Ryder and Rowan. Ryder was a name my mom was fine with, and I wanted something that she liked too, since parents name their children. And of course, since she had objected so much to Zinibus, I kind of wanted a bit more of a, oh, that's at least an okay name. I felt Ryder was definitely an okay name, but I do wish I made it my middle name instead. I much prefer Rowan because I love trees and I wanted a nature-based name. But both my mom and sister had said that the name was more feminine, that they never heard it used as a more male kind of name, and at the time this made me feel a bit more uncertain about it because I was still kind of locked in the whole male versus female mindset, even though I was breaking away bit by bit. So I made Rowan be my middle name instead, unfortunately. But that's why I display my full name on my books, because I want to show off the Rowan in me, because I do prefer that name. As for my last name, I wanted something unique, since we go by last name at martial arts, and it's a name that can, of course, be passed along to future kids, and you can make like a lineage out of. So I chose Phoenix for multiple reasons. Phoenixes are mythological birds that burst into flame and are reborn from the ashes, symbolizing transformation, growth, and change. Of course, being someone who's very into fantasy, I have always enjoyed phoenixes. But being a transgender person who transformed a lot, it feels like I myself am a phoenix. I've transformed my body through hormones and surgeries, yes, but also by doing plenty of martial arts and strengthening myself. I've transformed my mind by getting rid of my sexist and homophobic views that I once held, and becoming way more open-minded. I've transformed my emotions by learning how to regulate them better once discovering my autism and its triggers, and learning how to overcome the anxiety. I've transformed spiritually, finding my place in the world through a Taoist lens. I have truly transformed so much that looking back on who I used to be causes me to cringe a lot. But it makes my transformation all the more beautiful and magical to see how much I've changed, and learned, and grown. 2 years after choosing Phoenix as a name, I also discovered that in China, the name for Phoenix is actually male and female merged together. The Phoenix is known as the king of all birds, but when paired with the dragon, it becomes the yin, or feminine, while the dragon is the yang, or masculine. The phoenix is therefore like a transgender, gender fluid sort of symbol, all about yin-yang balance, which is also very core to my existence, and why I connect so much with Taoist philosophy. I know in other mythologies, phoenixes are actually intersex, with being literally half male, half female, like split down the center. This was a cool fact to just learn after choosing the name, as if I truly am a phoenix at heart. Another fun fact I discovered later on was that the phoenix is part of the Queen logo. This band and Freddie Mercury himself, of course being LGBT, have both been big inspirations to me, and I also learned to accept myself via listening to their music. It's cool that the phoenix is just a part of their logo, connecting me to them even more. Following my timeline, in January of 2021, I stopped taking the testosterone shot. I switched to the gel instead. Please note that not all insurance will cover the gel, and you might need to pay more upfront than for the shot. The shot is typically $150 per bottle, while the gel can range from $400 to $700 per prescription. My insurance did not cover much of it until we met the deductible, and then we had to also use GoodRx in order to lower the price. Now, I wanted to do this switch because, as previously stated, I couldn't give the shot to myself. My mom was getting tired of doing it, and I didn't want to be dependent on her for the rest of my life with it. I therefore asked to change to the gel, since it was much easier to apply to myself. Being daily instead of every 2 weeks would also make it easier to remember to do it. However, the gel is not as effective as the injection, since it's not going directly into the body, and the skin only absorbs a certain amount. Even with doing 2 pumps on both arms, with 4 pumps total daily, my T levels dropped. After over 5 years of not having monthly cycles, the cycle came back and it took me completely by surprise, since the testosterone was supposed to be suppressing it. It was horrible. My dysphoria returned literally overnight, and I just wanted to crumple up and die. I didn't want to go back to being dependent on someone else via the shot, so I decided to seek bottom surgery instead to have a more permanent solution to make sure this would never happen again, regardless of if I was on the hormones or not. After having a cycle while being on T, I needed to get surgery done to prevent myself from ever having cycles again. However, I didn't know if this meant I would be stuck taking T forever. My personal endocrinologist told me I would have to be on hormones after surgery, as my body would no longer be able to produce its own hormones. However, he had never heard of anyone getting off hormones after having bottom surgery, and I believe he thought that I would be removing the ovaries as well. I therefore got a second opinion from a different endocrinologist, who had multiple clients get bottom surgery done and get off hormones afterwards. She told me they were completely fine being off hormones as long as they left their ovaries in, so their bodies would continue to produce hormones on their own. I'll just say it right now, this did not work out for me. In fact, the ovaries caused a lot of issues being left inside me that I had to get them removed later on, and now I do have to be on hormones the rest of my life. I'll get into all of this in the parts to come, but I want to make sure to make note of it here. Anyhow, I went in with the belief that I could get off T so long as I left the ovaries alone. I was excited about this prospect because the gel was ineffective, I couldn't give myself the shot, I didn't want to rely on expensive medication that insurance may or may not cover for the rest of my life, or have constant blood work and checkup appointments. I also had gotten the permanent effects that I wanted from T, with the lower voice and facial hair, so it was only the monthly horrors that I needed to prevent. I chose a partial hysterectomy, which would remove the uterus, cervix, and fallopian tubes. Now, at first, I wasn't on board with the surgery because it sounded really extreme by removing 3 organs. I therefore sought a different solution at first, which was an IUD. Needless to say, it didn't work out for me, as I'm very touchy and didn't want anything going into me like that, especially while I'm awake. But I wanted to mention this method as an IUD could be a good solution for other trans people who can stand having something put in them. It would block cycles from happening. I'm not sure if you would still need the hormones if you got a hormonal-based IUD, because I didn't go this route, but it's something to keep in mind if you're considering surgery or would rather not have surgery done. In order to get a partial hysterectomy in California, I needed to get 2 letters from 2 different psychologists stating that I knew this was a permanent surgery, I'd never be able to have biological kids, at least in the traditional sense, and that I had a very specific need for surgery. If you don't get these referrals, you likely can't get the surgery done, or you'll have to pay for the entire surgery yourself because the insurance won't cover it without a good reason, and it is expensive. My surgery was scheduled for November 5th, 2021. Leading up to the surgery, I had a few appointments to go over what to expect, I had to get blood work done, and I had to do a COVID test, since this was still during the COVID time era. Thankfully, all prior tests came back fine, and I was able to get my surgery done the day it was scheduled, instead of being forced to reschedule. I was particularly worried that I would have to wait for 2022, in which we would have to pay more for the surgery since the deductible would start all over again with the new year. Just as with top surgery, I got a cleaning solution that I used the night before leaving for the surgery, which was scheduled for noon on a Friday. I had to wear clean pajamas and sleep in clean sheets the night before, and wear clean pants that would be easy to pull down after surgery. Of course, you don't eat anything leading up to the surgery, and you can only drink up until a certain point. The doctors wanted me to drink a whole bottle of Gatorade in the morning for the electrolytes. I got the surgery done by Dr. Uli of Sharp. When I went in, I got changed into a dressing gown, then they put the IV in me. And ever since the surgery, I have a huge fear of IVs. They stuck it in me, which was actually very painful, and I think they ran something through it right away. I suddenly struggled to breathe. I was literally choking for air, my anxiety was triggered so hardcore, and I thought I was suffocating. After a bit, I was able to gain control back and calm down, but this was one of the worst parts of the surgery. I took a few pain medications, though I wasn't able to take all of them, and then they rolled me on into the operating room. They put me on the table, and that's all I remember. I was in surgery for 2 or 3 hours, getting the laparoscopic partial hysterectomy. Essentially, this means it's robot assisted, with robots going in through tiny incisions to pull out the cervix, uterus, and fallopian tubes. I left the ovaries in. I then moved to the recovery room, as everything had gone fine. I was very groggy, coming in and out. Eventually, I woke up and got out of bed. I felt insanely nauseous, like I was going to throw up, and then they made me walk to the bathroom to try and go pee. But I wasn't able to do anything, so I just went super slowly back to the bed and slept off the nausea. When I next woke up, I heard them talking about preparing a room for me in order to stay the night. It was after 9 p.m. by this point. I felt much better and steadier on my feet, so I tried to go to the bathroom again, and since I was able to pee, I was able to leave. So we left around 10 p.m. That night, I was super awake and kept having to go pee thanks to all the fluids from the IV. I slept on the downstairs couch since I wasn't allowed to use the stairs, but the next day I was actually able to get up them pretty easily. So the surgery was actually not that bad, apart from the near suffocation before it happened and the nausea after I woke up. I walked around very often to avoid blood clots. Yet since I wasn't feeling much pain, I sometimes overdid it with the walking and then was more couch-bound the next day. Pain-wise, top surgery had been worse, and even that was just due to the drains. Despite not feeling much pain, I still took the pain meds for the first 4 or 5 days, since the doctor wanted me to alternate between 2 different pain medications every 3 hours, which felt like it was pretty overdoing it. One thing I wasn't expecting but is completely normal after an intense surgery is constipation. I was horribly constipated for 3 days after the surgery, so just be aware of this. Another thing is that you're going to see blood in your pee as if you're on a cycle. This is of course normal, considering that you just got operated on. This clears up after a few days, and after that, you're free. I was out of work for 6 weeks, and it needed to be the full 6 weeks, because Dr. Uli didn't want any sweat infecting the incisions, nor have me bend down or move in weird ways that would injure my insides. You can drive after 2 weeks, and if you're not on your feet and have a desk job, you can probably return after 2 weeks as well. But my doctor also kept me out of work because she didn't want me stressed out, so even if I just stood at the register during a lunch rush and didn't really move much, it could still be stressful with the environment. So if you have a stressful desk job, you still might be out longer. Since I was out of work for 6 weeks, I was able to get on disability. I was allowed to resume Tai Chi after 2 or 3 weeks, so long as I didn't sink in the stances and was being very careful, though I believe I went back after 4 weeks. After 6 weeks, I eased into Kung Fu again. This is a good point to mention that you'll want to get into exercise if you haven't already, in order to strengthen your core and pelvic area. Upon doing later research, I learned that many people who have gotten hysterectomies have had pelvic organ prolapse, where the pelvic organs collapse inside. Strengthening the pelvic floor muscles through specific exercises will help prevent this, especially as you get older. The surgery ended up being about $100,000, so you definitely want to be sure you get those referral letters to have insurance cover this, and meet your deductible beforehand. The insurance covered a good chunk of the cost, plus it looked like the hospital overcharged me and took off part of the bill after the fact. I only had to pay about $3,600, which is way better than it could have been. After bottom surgery and getting off tea, I finally felt I had fully transitioned. I focused more on writing my story, soon becoming obsessed with my gay characters. In fact, I drew these 2 characters together 222 times within 2 months in 2022, and I kept drawing them for months afterwards. It was around this time that I started questioning my sexuality. After all, I had taken on the label of asexual for years, finding myself sex repulsed and uninterested in relationships. But now that I had transitioned fully, I was able to explore my sexuality. And after drawing my gay character so much, I really began to ponder if I had a romantic orientation. After all, growing up, I wanted a best friend who I could live with, go on adventures with, do artsy crafts with, and raise kids with. And isn't that what a romantic partner is? When asking others what they thought my sexuality was, one friend put it best, saying my gay art was romantic and lifestyle in nature, like a longing from in your heart. It was then that I realized I did want a relationship. While I still saw myself as asexual, I was interested in giving this dating stuff a try, inspired to dress and even act like my gay characters as I gained a confidence boost. For most of 2022, I looked for a partner through online dating platforms since I wasn't sure how to find a partner in real life. I settled for finding a male or masculine presenting non-binary partner because despite getting along with most females I meet, I couldn't see myself necessarily having a feminine presenting person for a partner. I was still open if it were to happen, of course, but I began the search with a masculine presenting person. I had a hard time making any connections until late August or early September of 2022. This was when I showed up as the last result on one guy's recommendations, a little far outside his radius. He had a cat, so I liked him back and we began talking about cats, and so much more. We met in September and I had my first ever date. In that first date, we discussed big topics, like kids and if he'd be willing to go vegan, as I didn't want us to waste one another's time if we couldn't meet each other's criteria. Needless to say, the date went great, and lasted many hours. By the second date later that week, we were officially boyfriends. I did take on more masculine terms for myself since I didn't always like the neutral terms and definitely didn't want feminine terms. 3 months later, on December 22nd, I proposed to him, knowing that this was the one and only person for me, who could respect me for being asexual and trans and non-binary and everything else. June 22nd, 2024, we got married. It was all thanks to my characters that I turned gay, as I like to say. However, I think my hormones changing also had a lot to do with my sudden interest in finding a partner. Even though T is supposed to make you more sex-driven, I felt more interested in a relationship after I got off the hormone, in late 2021, right after the hysterectomy. Once I got back on T later, due to my estrogen levels dropping, my interest in a relationship faded a little. That's not to say I have no interest in my husband, of course. We are just less and less physical. Not that we ever did anything that sexual anyway with me being sex repulsed, but I merely see him more and more as a best friend, just a very special best friend, rather than necessarily always a romantic partner. Anyhow, getting off T brought changes, but some changes are permanent. What remained the same was my deeper voice, body and facial hair, though new hair did not grow in, and no monthly cycles, though this of course was thanks to having a partial hysterectomy. Otherwise, the cycles would have returned. What changed was my stronger sense of smell came back, and my body shape became a bit more curved again. This increased my dysphoria, but it was livable. However, probably 6 or 7 months after surgery and getting off T, I started to notice that my chest seemed to be regrowing in a feminine manner. As I had top surgery, I knew this tissue could not regrow, since it'd literally been suctioned away already, and I thereby realized that some tissue was just left behind from the first surgery, which was then reforming to be more feminine, since I was no longer on testosterone. I was also exercising less during this time period due to working an insane amount of hours between a full-time and a part-time job, and I had just met the love of my life, so we were going on plenty of adventures in the little free time I had, and my health was just deteriorating all around since I could not keep up with it all and was hardly ever at home. The lack of exercise likely played an equal role as losing T, since I had started T and vigorous martial arts exercise around the same time. This changed my body so much that the fat tissue stretched and Dr. Mofid was unable to remove it all, hence why what was left behind was reforming. At first, I went back to wearing binders, but I knew I'd have to get surgery again. There was just no way I could live like this. In May of 2023, I had a second top surgery with Dr. Mofid. Leading up to the surgery to ensure everything was removed this time, I stopped exercising entirely, allowing all of the fat tissue to reform in its feminine state and be properly taken away. The process was the same as before. Take a special cleaning shower the night prior and the morning of, wear clean pajamas and sleep in clean sheets, and wear plenty of button-ups. I had the same type of surgery with liposuction, leaving tiny scars behind. The big difference this time was that the drains were not directly attached to me, they were attached to a strap that was looped around my neck. This made it much less painful since the drains weren't pulling on my stitches. I was also able to do more on my own since I could hold both drains with one hand instead of two. The second difference was that the first surgery made my chest feel sensitive afterwards. Even when I continued plenty of martial arts after, trying to build up my strength post-surgery from 2017 to 2022, whenever I did grappling or had someone move across my chest, it would hurt. However, after the second surgery, I believe some nerves were damaged. I have lost sensitivity in my chest now, and am completely fine in grappling, so I no longer wince if someone smears across my chest, so the nerve damage is actually a plus. Now, I had the surgery on a Monday again, and the drains were removed on Friday this time, which was just as painful as the first time around. I was out of work again for 2 weeks, and on light duty for another 2 weeks. I couldn't swim or do exercise for a whole month. I recovered just fine, especially with my then-fiancé at my side. Surely after all these surgeries, I was done with my transition. Right? Wrong. I had a bunch of health issues in 2023, mostly due to being trans. While some of the issues were related to my anxiety returning, I had also experienced a major drop in my estrogen levels. To sum it up, my body was essentially going through menopause since my ovaries weren't producing hormones, and I continued to have issues as these ovaries decided to develop cysts. So all of my health issues were essentially thanks to the ovaries. To start off, I already mentioned working so much that I barely had any time to sleep, eat, or exercise. I ended up leaving my part-time job, which was teaching martial arts, and I later made my full-time into a part-time job because I just couldn't handle it. Masking my autism was getting way too exhausting, and I didn't realize I had way surpassed my limits until later on. The lack of exercise led to my anxiety returning, which caused a lot of eating issues since my anxiety makes it difficult to eat. In the latter half of 2023, I lost a lot of weight, and as you can recall, I have always been on the thin side. So I lost weight until I was down to 99 pounds, and I truly thought I would end up in the hospital, which only made the anxiety worse and made it even harder to eat. I was so weak I was bedridden at times. I would call out of work and go home early, despite being one of the more reliable workers before all these issues began. I saw nutritionists and psychologists, but none of these doctors were able to help me. Eventually, I just managed to pull myself to my feet and began doing exercise again with at-home workouts. Though these never worked for me in the past, I was able to build some strength and keep my streak going for a few months. This cured my anxiety literally pretty early on, and then I was able to eat again until I was back to about 110, which was pretty much what I weighed before I started testosterone. However, I was still having issues. Abdominal cramping, bloating and pressure, acid reflux, hot and cold flashes, dizziness and lightheadedness, headaches and eye sensitivity, bowel issues, mood swings, fevers, an itchy intestine. I began to wonder if these issues were hormonal based. My coworker was having a lot of similar symptoms to me, and she thought she was pregnant. There was no way I could be pregnant, not only due to the hysterectomy, but also because of being a sex-repulsed asexual. So I thought my hormone levels were just too low, while hers were too high. This got me checking my estrogen levels for the past few years, from the hysterectomy onwards. And I saw that my estrogen had dropped all the way down to 21, which would have been fine if I was still on testosterone. Essentially, my body was not producing any of its own hormones like it should have been. My ovaries had failed me, and I was now going through menopause in my 20s. At the very end of 2023, once the anxiety issues were gone, I returned to my former endocrinologist and got back on T-gel. I chose the gel despite it being less effective than the shot because I didn't need a big amount. I just needed some hormones in me. We started off with 1 pump per arm, which meant 2 pumps per day, in order to reintroduce the hormones slowly. 2024, I had to get new insurance and I qualified for Medi-Cal, which was a major lifesaver that year. I was in and out of the doctor's office so often for tests. It was literally bi-weekly or even weekly towards the end there. I had no idea what was going on. I was getting every test I could think of, wondering if all this pressure was associated with food allergies, UTIs, vitamin deficiency, so on. I was tracking my symptoms literally by the day, trying to pinpoint if certain foods or exercising a particular way was making me feel so sick. We upped my testosterone to 2 pumps per arm and 4 pumps a day total, which was the exact prescription I had when I first used the gel. This didn't happen until further along with all these issues, but I think it might have amplified the issues and all the symptoms I had already been having. Because all of the cramping, pain, pressure, bloating in my abdomen, and the nausea, it all turned out to be ovarian cysts. And apparently too much testosterone can cause these types of cysts. Now, it took literal months to figure this out. I had so many blood and urine tests done that did not show up with anything. In April, weeks away from getting an ultrasound, I believe one of the cysts burst. That day, I was already kind of feeling pressure and bloating, but I really wanted to go to my martial arts class, as I had re-signed up as a student in February to help my health issues, and because I really missed my community. I wasn't doing too many classes in the beginning due to feeling sick so often, but I determined I was good enough to go to this particular class that day. Now, the class went fine, and we did stretching afterwards. But after standing up from stretching, I immediately felt so nauseous, lightheaded, and hot. And it did not help that it was hot outside. I left the school feeling like I was going to throw up. But it didn't feel like it was my stomach that wanted to throw up. It just felt like my body. And an acidic feeling spread through my body from my core, just like extending outwards. And I was just crumpled over in pain. But after an hour, it just kind of went away and I was back to normal. The pain was gone, I felt fine, didn't throw up, but I definitely did not eat anything the rest of the day just in case. Now, I should have gone to the ER and I wish I had, but I didn't because the pain had gone on its own and I didn't throw up. However, when the last day of April showed up for my ultrasound, nothing showed up on the test because the cyst had already burst. As May came around, I was preparing for my martial arts tournament, just forcing myself to push through the abdominal pressure, swelling, itchy intestine. Now, June 1st, we had tournament. I didn't do any combative events because I did not want to risk getting hit since I still didn't know what was going on. June 2nd, I went to the ER. Now, I didn't need to go to the ER, but I chose to go because I knew there was something wrong. And I figured that the ER would give me more tests that the regular doctors just couldn't. So the ER was basically my last resort to see if something was going on. And if their tests showed nothing, I was finally just going to drop it and give up with trying to figure out what was wrong. I did blood work, a urine test, an ultrasound, and a CT scan. The ultrasound showed up with a 2-centimeter cyst on my left ovary. And I finally had the answer I'd been seeking for literally months and through multiple tests. And every single symptom I had matched with the ovarian cyst symptoms. After doing plenty of research on ovarian cyst and calling doctors nonstop in order to get in for surgery, I had a consultation mid-June. On Friday, literally the day before my wedding, I got a call that my surgery would be the following Friday, literally a week later. I could take that date, or I would otherwise have to wait till October. And I'd lose my Medi-Cal by then, since my renewal period was coming up, and at that point I was making too much money to continue qualifying. So the week after getting married, I had to do plenty of consultations, phone calls, and tests, which was incredibly stressful to get everything in so last minute. I was also doing lots of research as to whether I should leave an ovary in or not, or just take them both out, and this was where I was really lacking information, especially when it comes to trans individuals. Now, some people said to leave one ovary in. That way your body can still produce its own hormones, especially if you feel that you might be unable to get hormone therapy in the future, or that you might just lose it altogether. If you want biological kids, it would also be wise to keep an ovary in, so that way you can have biological kids using IVF. Now, I'm not going to go into IVF. I did do plenty of research on that, though, because before all these health issues had started, my husband and I had talked about if we wanted biological kids or not, and I was just looking into IVF. And for IVF to happen, especially with both of our genetics, I would need to have an ovary with all the eggs, and they would take the eggs and do their thing. But in the end, we both agreed that no, we'd rather adopt kids to save some kids' lives and give them a better home. Plus, there's too many humans on this earth to begin with, so we shouldn't be bringing in more humans. But if having a biological kid is very important to you, I recommend that you do leave an ovary in, so that way you can still have the opportunity to use IVF, which is very insanely expensive and not covered by insurance. But do keep in mind, if you leave your ovary in, your health issues are likely to continue, though they might be less extreme. I'm not really sure on that. Other people said that they removed both ovaries and hormone therapy wasn't enough for them afterwards. But most of these people were not trans individuals, they were just cis women who only took estrogen after their surgery. Bodies need estrogen and testosterone, and the lack of testosterone was what seemed to be causing these women all these issues still. Of course, despite researching a crazy amount of these medical issues during this time period, I'm not a doctor, and you should seek a professional opinion regarding this. Now, I decided to get both ovaries removed. I was scared of the possibility of having more cysts develop on the other ovary in the future, allowing these issues to continue, or risk having one rupture. And the more cysts you have, the more likely that one will be infected. And if it ruptures, it can kill you as easily as a burst appendix. I also figured that my ovaries weren't working anyway, so there was just no point to me keeping them in. June 28th, 2024, I had a laparoscopic oophorectomy performed by Dr. Rees of UCSD. I did the shower with the special cleaning solution the night before and the morning of. We had to be at the hospital super early, as I was the first surgery of the day. Dr. Rees gets a huge shout out here, as she understood exactly all the pain I was going through and how badly I needed this surgery, that she stuffed me into her busy schedule very last minute. I will forever be thankful to her for this, as well as for performing the operation itself, of course, in the first place. The surgery went mostly fine. The doctors scraped my stomach by mistake, but it was a tiny nick, nothing happened, it wasn't really a big deal, but they did want me to stay in the hospital overnight in order to monitor it, and I also wasn't really allowed to eat anything until the following day, starting off with veggie broth. As I slept all day, I was wide awake that night and just kind of walking around the hospital, which was quite the experience. And then, of course, I was going to the bathroom a lot because of all the IV fluids. And there's definitely blood, so just be aware that there's going to be blood again. And it was a little painful to go. Thankfully, the next day I was doing quite fine and I was able to go home in the late afternoon. Now, after having all of these surgeries, I can confirm that this surgery was the most painful one I had. That night that I went back home, my left side actually had such sharp pain that would come and go, that I thought they had messed something up on this side, or that it was on this side that my stomach got scraped or something. I actually had to use an opioid medication to stifle the pain, which I really try not to use that type of stuff. But like I had to just use it because it was that extreme. Now it turns out that it was actually just the gas trapped in my body. Usually you feel the gas in your shoulder, according to a lot of different accounts, but for me it was down like where the incisions were. I was out of work for 6 weeks and on disability the entire time. I didn't go back to martial arts until I had already returned to work. This surgery was just more intense and painful that I took things much more slowly, being sure to ease back into them. And this is another reminder to get into exercise to strengthen your pelvic floor muscles and avoid pelvic organ prolapse. Now, it was a good decision I got both ovaries removed, because both ovaries had been covered in cysts. You could not even see the ovaries underneath one of the cysts, because the cyst was that big. While I considered only removing the left ovary, because that was the one that had the 2 centimeter cyst in the ER's ultrasound, it was actually my right ovary that had the big cyst, which was 5 centimeters, or the size of a tangerine. So probably about that. It had grown that big in less than a month, because it did not show up on that ultrasound at the ER. And because it was so big, the doctors had to pop it in my body. Like it was covered in a bag, but they had to pop it in my body in order to remove it. Now, I don't have a total bill for how much all of this would have cost because Medi-Cal had covered it, thankfully. But I imagine it would have been a very expensive procedure, especially with having to stay overnight. After removing the ovaries, I knew I'd have to be on hormones for the rest of my life. As if that wasn't already clear to me when my estrogen levels had dropped so significantly in 2023. Now I have accepted this fate, though it does mean I need expensive medication and constant doctor appointments, and blood work. I'm also aware that if I lose access to hormones, my body will go through menopause, and I'd have the same health issues from 2023, and also have to worry about having brittle bones. I will strive to remain on testosterone gel, since I can apply it myself and not depend on others. I have also gotten quite good at getting the insurance to cover the gel, since they usually don't cover the topicals. In order to do this, you kind of just bother them over and over again and explain how you just can't do the shot. As stated before, after having bottom surgery, I don't need the gel to be as effective as a shot in order to keep the monthly cycles away, since I can't ever have those again anyway. So even though the gel is less effective than the shot, it works well enough for me now. Of course, if this was you, you can continue the shot if that's your preferred way of doing it. As a final note in regard to surgeries and hormones, if you get a partial hysterectomy, you'll likely just need to be on hormones the rest of your life, even if you leave the ovaries in. There's a chance that your ovaries will still produce hormones for you, but that chance is not that high. The health issues I faced were definitely not worth it. And I wish I had just remained on T after the hysterectomy and even just got the ovaries removed when I had gotten the initial hysterectomy done. But I'm now using this as a big learning experience to educate other trans folks in the hopes of providing more insight on what to expect with all these types of surgeries and hormones. My physical gender transition is over with. For real this time, after doing everything twice. I have since been pondering gender identity, gender expression, and gender roles. This is thanks to writing one of my characters who really inspires me, and who I happen to connect to a lot since 2022, and yes, this is the same character that turned me gay. When writing and drawing Hyaktu so much, I felt he was on the gender fluid side. He wears whatever he wants, presents however he likes, and comes across as more feminine sometimes. However, he doesn't feel like a full-on gender-fluid character, such as my other character Mint, who switches between male, female, and non-binary depending on the day. Indeed, his gender fluidity feels more internal than external, despite him sometimes wearing more feminine clothes. After having this realization, I began to wonder if this gender fluidity was an extension of myself appearing in him once again. I certainly feel it's more of an internal sense, not something I would outwardly display. Indeed, the thought of wearing a dress or something similar would likely trigger a severe bout of dysphoria that I, still just couldn't do that. Yet sometimes I do feel like I'm more on, the feminine side, though that is, of course, important to embrace both masculinity and femininity, especially as someone who follows yin-yang philosophy. Now, being gender fluid, if that's truly what I am, is still definitely a new experience for me, and one that I will be playing with more in the future. I do feel I'm able to express myself better nowadays, especially post-transition, after all my learning and growing as a person, and getting rid of my dysphoria. Regardless of where the future takes my gender identity, I will remain open-minded about it, reflecting on myself through my characters and writing. I truly feel I was born trans and non-binary. This path was just always destined for me. Even though growing up trans in school was never fun and increased my anxiety, even though the dysphoria was so crushing, even though I had to go through double the surgeries in order to feel comfortable in my own skin, even though being trans is so expensive via medication, surgeries, clothes, even though I have to be on medication the rest of my life, I truly just embrace the transness within me and feel like this was always just meant to be. I was meant to be born into a female body, realizing the wrongness of society's gender roles and how colonization just destroyed so many cultures in order to maintain patriarchal control. I was meant to struggle with the thought of being in the LGBT plus community so I could research them, emphasize with them, and ultimately accept myself as part of them through reflecting on the characters and stories I'd write. I was meant to be transgender in order to learn self-defense, which led me to my martial arts school, immersing me in this amazing, supportive, and caring community. I was meant to be non-binary, to embrace the yin-yang, and discover my place in Taoist philosophy, balancing this constant turmoil within. I was meant to be queer, finding the most amazing and accepting life partner. I was just meant to be the phoenix, transforming my existence in every way I can, striving to be better in body, mind, emotions, spirit, and soul. Thank you for following along with my story. Thank you to my family and friends for supporting me and accepting me over the years. Please feel free to pass on this knowledge, especially if you are trans or you know other trans people, or both. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Let my experience be a way to learn more about the transition process and provide insight on topics that you can't always find information on. It is important to get this knowledge out there, as trans people are more and more under attack. Our identities threaten to be erased. But we will never be erased, because trans people will always exist. We always have. Be who you are meant to be. Explore your identity, and keep fighting for our community. Whether you're on the forefront or in the background, we will not be erased. We will thrive. We will live. We belong. Thank you.